Hello and welcome back to the Bird's Eye View podcast. We are here on Sunday, October 20th, and we're going to be continuing our series of looking back on the year that was for each of the Toronto Blue Jays minor league affiliates. We're super excited today to be joined by Brian Frank of the Herd Chronicles. You can find his work at at herdchronicles.com. He does a great job of uh, providing analysis, covering the Buffalo Bisons. So really excited to talk with him about the year that was in Buffalo. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this today, Brian.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm a big fan of the podcast. I love listening to you guys, so it's an absolute pleasure to come on.
Awesome. Really appreciate that. Thank you very much. Before we kind of get into some of the specifics, I mean, an interesting year for Buffalo. Obviously, as is always the case in minor leagues, a lot of guys coming and going over the course of the year. But I think this year across the Blue Jays minor league organizations, there was just a ton of that where there's so many players coming and going this season. What was kind of your thoughts? I mean, just overall on the season that was for the Bisons.
Yeah, no, you're spot on there. Like when I look back at this season, and I think like years from now, when I look back on this season, it's going to be all the player movement that there was. I mean, when the year started, looking at the potential lineup that the Bisons had in place with, I didn't really expect like Spencer Horwitz or Nathan Lucas to be here long, because I thought they would get called up, but having like Lucas and Horwitz and Barger, and then the starts that like Leo Jimenez and Stuart Baroa got off to, and it looked like their lineup was really stacked. And then through mostly from stuff that happened in Toronto and the performance that those guys performed here in Buffalo, but with all the injuries and the Blue Jays not contending, and then eventually like the trade deadline moving out established players, there was just so much turnover. The Bisons actually used 80 players last year,
Wow.
50 pitchers, which was
Wow.
a franchise record. And they had 227 roster moves. And they've really, like, when you look back, like, especially since the pandemic, they've kind of had pretty good roster stability. I mean, there's been some guys going up like Schneider and Clement and stuff, but they've kind of kept their main lineup in place until this year when everything changed. But yeah, that's definitely the story of the season to me.
Yeah, it's kind of fun to think about, the way I guess that the team developed over the course of the year because, obviously the year didn't go the way that the Blue Jays had wanted, but it's pretty exciting to see like this group of guys who had been there for a couple years and kind of been, coming up together to all kind of get their shot at the same time and move into the Blue Jays lineup basically. For you kind of seeing them, like, I mean, how much were you kind of keeping tabs on those guys as they were in the middle of the Blue Jays lineup in the second half?
Yeah, absolutely. It was really weird watching Blue Jay games, like kind of from about mid-season to the end, because it was really like it was like a Bison's lineup with like especially when Bichette got hurt, and it was like a Bison lineup with
Yeah.
Vladdy and Springer pretty much. And yeah, I mean, I think you judge success in AAA on a couple things. One is your record in the standings, and this year was the first time in Casey Candel's 4 years as manager that he didn't finish above 500. But then also how you're developing players for the major leagues. And, in that aspect, they certainly were successful this year because you had so many guys go up and show that they could play at that level and that they were, comfortable at that level. So yeah, it was really fun watching Blue Jays games as the year wore on.
Yeah, I bet for sure. Let's touch on the kind of the wins and losses aspect of it because for a team with so much turnover, it is tough to kind of keep that continuity and kind of be able to win games when you have guys coming and going. And of course, they finish 500 in the first half and then go way below in the second half. And of course, I mean, they ended the season with the most runs against in the International League, and it kind of the pitching seemed to be an issue for the whole season. But how did you kind of see that develop over the course of the year where they were at least a 500 team in the first half before losing a bunch of players in the second half and then kind of having that disappointing finish from a standings perspective?
Yeah, like you said, they were 500 in the first half, and I kind of expected that to kind of continue in the second half. They really kind of had, it was almost like three different teams, because they had that team they started out with that I talked about, and then there was kind of like an interim period where they had like Gabriel Cancel and guys like that in here, and then guys like Alan Roden and Josh Kasevich came up, and Then there was the trade deadline, and he had a little infusion there with Jonathan Clase, and Will Wagner was here for a little bit. And so it really was kind of, when you look at it, almost like three different teams. Like you had the beginning team, that interim team, and then the team they wound up with. And yeah, pitching was definitely an issue. I think mostly because starting pitching kind of was inconsistent or injured, and that really kind of taxed the bullpen. You had guys that seemed like were pitching almost every single day, guys like Brandon Eisert and Mason Fluharty. It seemed like they were going out there every day. A lot of that had to do with injuries, like Chad Dallas getting hurt, as uh, had to have Tommy John surgery. Tiedemann obviously went out early in the year, and so Adam Macko had an injury at New Hampshire and never he made it to Buffalo right at the tail end, but never really got to be here and pitch. And so those injuries to starting pitchers, I think, were probably when you really dig in, those were kind of one of the big reasons why they didn't finish 500 this year.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, of course, the arm injury is a huge story across the organization for the Blue Jays this season, where it seems like there was pitchers at every level kind of going down at some point, and for the Bisons, that resulted in getting to see guys like Aaron Sanchez and James Kaprielian, former major leaguers, kind of make their way into the rotation. Sanchez specifically is a guy that I wanted to ask you about because he ends up throwing, I think, over 60 innings for the Bisons this year. I mean, what was it like kind of seeing him back in Buffalo after all these years?
It was strange. Like he'd been here a couple times with visiting teams. Like he was here with Rochester. I think he might have been here with Syracuse a little bit too. He'd been in here with different teams over the years, but it was definitely odd seeing him in a Bison's uniform again. And he had a couple good starts, but he just could never really kind of follow that up with like back to back and really getting on a little run. And eventually they just kind of moved on, but it was cool having him back, and I was rooting for him to have some success, but it never really kind of took root.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Cool story, at least to kind of
Yeah.
see a guy who was so imperative to some of the Blue Jays' successful years in the mid 2010s there. Sticking on the pitching side, Andrew Bash, of course, he ends up winning the team's Pitcher of the Year award, and a guy who was kind of thrust into so many roles. He was working as a starter, working as a reliever, and he throws 78.2 innings and ends up with a sub 3 ERA. What did you kind of see from him and his development this year? I think he's kind of gone under the radar as a
Yeah.
potential, Blue Jays story prospect pitcher type.
Yeah, you're right. He's kind of like a guy who like you said, he has different roles. A lot of times he's pitching in relief, and then he's been really successful as a starter. In 2023, he kind of finished the year as a starter and did great in that role. Um, this year he was flipping between a reliever and a starter. And both years, 2023 and 2024, he's kind of a guy that sneaks up at you. Like you look at his numbers at the end of the year and you're like, wow, he really had a good year. But he's not the flashy prospect like Tiedemann or something. But yeah, he just like in 2023 at a 2.22 ERA, this year 2.97, and just whatever role they put him in, he's just successful, and has really helped to solidify the Bison staff the last couple of years.
Yeah, what kind of has made him so successful? I mean, just from a guy who like doesn't pop up as like a stuff monster or kind of all these things that make prospect fans excited about pitchers. But I mean, for him, what has it kind of been that's led to his success?
I think some of it is just like the comfortability, if that's a word,
Yeah,
of pitching out of the bullpen and as a starter. Like I've talked with them about that before, because there's a lot of guys who they'll switch to the bullpen and they don't have a lot of success there, or they'll bring them to the starting rotation, and they're good as a reliever but not as a starter. A lot of it is like being ready to pitch out of the bullpen, having to pitch like every other day or whatever's expected of them out of the bullpen, as opposed to pitching every fifth day as a starter.
right.
And I think he's just comfortable with either role. Like he can do either role well. I know Bowden France is a guy who I've talked to who seems to be much more comfortable as a starter than as a
Right.
reliever. And I think Bash can just switch between those two roles comfortably, and ha has really done a great job.
Yeah, that's really cool to hear. I mean, obviously we're in the middle of October right now, so MLB playoffs going on, and I think seeing guys like that is really that we're seeing like what the value of those guys are, where they can either provide innings out of the bullpen to kind of help their bullpen, or they can start and go multiple innings. I think it's that type of pitcher is going to become really valuable in the future. So
Mhm.
it's really good to see Bash like having that much success.
Yeah, the Major League playoffs, it almost seems like it's like a war of attrition now with
Yeah,
the
exactly.
yeah, it's like whoever has the last man standing wins, you know.
Yeah, it's crazy to watch for sure. One of the other, I think one of the like most interesting stories of the Bison season, when you look like purely from a number standpoint, is Luis Quinones going 11-0 as a reliever. Like, I mean, that's just was such a wild story. I mean, what did you kind of see from him there, and how was he able to do that? I mean, it's so crazy to see a reliever with 11 wins.
It really was, and I think a lot of that had to do with like starters not going 5 innings, so
Right.
the starter doesn't get awarded the win. So it might even be a game the Bisons are ahead in at the beginning of the game, but the starter comes out after 3 or 4 innings, and so a reliever gets awarded a win. Yeah, and he had kind of a high ERA. His ERA was over
Yeah.
5, so that makes the 11-0 even more. He's the only Bisons pitcher in history to get 11 wins without a loss in a season. But yeah, I mean, but some of that and the high ERA, and it's probably something I'm going to come back to as we talk, you know, in the minor leagues, it can happen where guys have like 2 or 3 rough outings and it inflates their ERA and it happens more than in the major leagues because in the major leagues if a guy comes out and he's struggling they'll take him out after 3 batters or whatever but in AAA they if a guy needs to get his pitches in or they'll keep him in for if he's supposed to throw 40 pitches that day they'll keep him in there and they get roughed up and it inflates their ERA to a point so I think that is a little bit why his ERA is high but yeah it was from a wins perspective, it was definitely a great season from him.
Yeah, certainly. I think one of those things that you just may never see again from
Yeah,
from a guy picking up 11 wins without a loss as a reliever like that is just a crazy story.
exactly. And like I said, in minor league baseball, where you don't have guys starting pitchers going as long, I forget how long it was, but it was like a month into the season before a Bison starting pitcher picked up a win.
Oh,
You
wow.
know, just for the fact that they weren't going the 5 innings. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so it's kind of a statistical abnormal thing that you're going to see maybe going forward.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Super interesting. We'll see. I can't imagine we'll see it again, but you never know. You never know. Kind of, sticking on the pitching staff, sticking in the bullpen. We've been, I think, pretty big Mason Fluharty fans on the podcast, but I think an interesting year from him where he kind of had like the really hot start where it was really going well, and then there was of course the Blue Jays having trouble in the bullpen, so you thought maybe he was going to get called up after that, and then just kind of stuck in Buffalo the whole year. What did you see from him? I mean, he was like you mentioned earlier. It seemed like he was pitching all the time for the Bisons, and
Yeah.
all in the end had a really nice season, and but just kind of maybe a little bit of an up and down for him there.
Yeah, he got off to a really good start. He really pitched a lot of games. I think it was 56 appearances for the year. And I kind of, he didn't tell me this, but I kind of wondered if that was, he kind of was wearing down a little bit because I think that's by far like the most he's ever pitched. But yeah, he looked great. And the thing that he does really well, and I think he knows this and knows that this is what his role is get left-handed batters out.
Yeah,
And for most of the season, when you looked at his splits, lefties were hitting like in the mid 100s against him. I think it ended up being closer to 200 at the end of the year, but there's really like a big disparity for him throughout his career with getting lefties out, and that's what he does really well. And the other thing about him too is he wasn't being used, exclusively in like 1 inning outings. Like he would
right.
often pitch like an inning and a third or 2/3 or even 2 innings on quite a few occasions. So yeah, so I think that's a good thing to look at from him is that he can give you multiple innings as well.
Yeah, yeah, super intriguing to see where he'll end up because I think he's kind of on the cusp now, and will probably have a shot to make the team out of spring training.
Yeah, I agree. And he's only 23 years old right now
Yeah.
too. So he's a young guy, but I definitely think with that skill of getting lefties out because you need to have that, you need to have the even though you have the three batter minimum rule now, I think a lot of people say, well, it's not as important as it used to be, but you still, when you get the other team's big left-handed bats up, you need a guy like that to come in and be able to shut them down and neutralize them. So I definitely think that he has a shot next year with a big
Yeah,
league.
100%. I mean, we're seeing it in the playoffs right now. There's Juan Soto, there's Bryce Harper, there's Shohei Ohtani. Just so many dominant left-handed hitters. So you definitely got to have those guys for sure. And he could be a really good one for the Blue Jays for a long time, hopefully. So we'll we'll
Absolutely.
we'll see. Let's move on to the hitting side because, of course, like I mentioned, pitching maybe not the most exciting part of the Bison season, but I think the offense. I mean, there's a big number of guys who I think had really nice seasons there, and it all kind of starts with Alan Roden, who was the team's MVP. He ended the year, of course, as the player of the month. And even for a guy who didn't start the year in Buffalo and kind of had that slow start when he came up to finish with the numbers that he did in AAA, I think was really incredible. How was his development and getting to know him a little bit this season?
Yeah, so like you said, when he first came to Buffalo, he got off to a real slow start. I think like his first 18 games, he was hitting like 150 something. And then July 28th, he just completely took off from that point to the end of the year and put up incredible numbers, winning the International League's Player of the Month award. And he said he made like a few adjustments before he took off there with like his leg kick and stuff,
Okay.
just like minor little things. But I think a lot of it just had to do with confidence, it when you start at a new level and you just happen to be in a slump right at that time, that's
Yeah.
tough, man. And he talked about that with me too, that like the fact that he did have that slump right when he started at AAA is something that he can look back on and know, like, yeah, you can battle through a slump and you just got to keep going out there and grinding and you're going to get through it. But yeah, he was incredible. And one of the things I heard about him coming up was that he was a good hitter, but that the power wasn't there. Like you didn't see that at all. I think
Yeah.
he finished the year with 16 home runs combined between the two levels. But yeah, I mean, he exit velocity, he smoked balls and he looked really good. And the power was not an issue. Like he hit for power here and drove the ball into the gaps. And he looks like a guy too that could force the Blue Jays' hand next year and to get into the major leagues. Absolutely.
Yeah, super exciting. I mean, just the overall finish and the player of the year. And like you mentioned, the power, I think super exciting. And kind of, you see the Blue Jays kind of have these prospects like the Spencer Horwitz types and kind of Alan Roden maybe fitting into the same mold where the
Yep.
power ends up playing up a little bit more each level they go up.
Exactly. Yeah, that's true. And you see that a lot. One of the things I think with that too is like when you look at guys now coming up through the minors, they come up through so much faster than they ever had before, and a lot of that has to do with like less levels of the minor
Yeah.
leagues. And so I think that's one of the reasons why you see the power coming late, later in their rise through, like coming in AAA and stuff.
Yeah, yeah, that's super interesting. I mean, I think especially, I mean, the way the Blue Jays draft too, like it seems like they do kind of go for these like maybe hit over power guys and then develop the power and as these guys get older. I mean, Josh Kasevich kind of the
Yep.
same mold, maybe not having necessarily the same power results as like an Alan Roden, but for him, another guy who you didn't get in Buffalo until his call up kind of maybe a little bit later in the year. What did you? I mean, he was super impressive in Buffalo as well.
Very impressive, and offensively and defensively, like a line drive machine. Um, Looked so solid on defense and so comfortable at short and kind of like I was sitting down. I usually am in the press box, but like I think it was like his first or second game at home in Buffalo, and I was sitting down by the field, and there was just something about him, like the way he carried
Yeah.
himself in the infield and calling for pop-ups and stuff. And you could just tell like this guy's like a leader, like that he was kind of taking over, and I've heard he has a great work ethic and power's another thing, as you mentioned, for him. But I think, and I talked to him about this, and he said, he thinks that that's something that's just going to come because he has good exit velocity, and as he gets older, that's just going to come. And I kind of agree with them. Like I think it will come for him. Um, but yeah, he was very impressive in his time here. One of the cool things he does that is kind of unique too that I noticed right away is his kind of like routine getting ready for games. He when they're throwing on the side right before the game, he does a little drill with it reminds me of when I played high school basketball. We did this dribbling drill like between our legs and stuff. And he like takes a ball and he bounces it like on the warning track and he like shifts his weight back and forth while he's doing it. And then he'll juggle like before games
Oh
too
wow.
sometimes. And so I asked him about that and he said like all those kind of like things that look a little quirky he got from like his college infield coach and
Huh.
like yeah, it's just kind of something that
Yeah.
stood out to me right away. But yeah, he looked really good, and I think he's going to be a if he's in Buffalo next year to start the year, he could be a guy who also forces the Jays' hand if he
Yeah.
plays like he did at the end of this year.
Yeah, that's really cool to hear. The warm-up stuff is super interesting. I always
Yeah,
love to hear like kind of some of the intricacies that all these guys have. I
he actually when he another cool thing about him when he went to college, he thought he was recruited to Oregon as a pitcher and position
oh,
player,
okay.
and he his freshman year he was going to pitch and he wasn't really big on pitching. He wanted to play every day. And then finally they the coach came to him and said, you know, from now on you're just going to be a position player. And he was really happy about that 'cause that's what he wanted to do. So I think, you know, he hasn't really been focusing on that position side of it for that long, which is kind of amazing that he's that good defensively as he is, because he
Yeah.
hasn't been doing it for that long. So there's a lot of growth, I think, in the future that could be there for him as well.
Yeah, that's really cool too. I'm kind of curious to get your thoughts on comparing a guy Kasevich to Leo Jimenez and kind of what you see from the two and what maybe would be kind of like the differences and what you kind of think how the two kind of stack up from their time in Buffalo this year.
But that is a great question, you know. That there's a lot of similarities there now that you mention. I haven't really thought about this, but there's a lot of similarities I think in their defense and how solid they are and they make the routine play. You know, they make the flashy play here and there, but it's kind of just like consistent defensively. Um Hitting wise, like Leo he came up at the end of 2023 for a little bit to Buffalo and really struggled. And I thought he was like one of the greatest stories early in the season this year. Just the start that he got off to. Um, so he struggled a little bit when he first came to AAA, whereas Kasevich didn't at all. Like he just kept
Right.
hitting. But Jimenez was just one of the great stories I thought of this year that not only did he get off to that great start in Buffalo, but then he went up to Toronto and just looked so comfortable filling in up there. Like, you know, he didn't miss a beat going up there and looked like he looks like he belongs wherever he's at. So I think that's a really good thing. But really do see a lot of similarities between the two.
Yeah, yeah, it's really interesting just with the way that the Blue Jays infield depth has kind of pooled up now here in the upper minors and kind of with the guys creeping into the major leagues and just kind of see how they all stack up and where things might fall, I guess, in the next couple
Right.
of years, whether it's the via trade or however they, if they decide to end up going to a rebuild or whatever, just kind of to see how these guys might all fit into the big league puzzle.
And with both those guys too, like you know, the Blue Jays value so much like defensive versatility and they're always moving guys around, which used to kind of drive me nuts at AAA because you never knew where guys were going to be. Now I
Yeah,
think I'm just kind of used to it. But you see guys, you know, at shortstop that they'll move off like Barger to third base or right field or something. But and they could do that with Jimenez or Kasevich as well. Like obviously like second base or third would be a smooth transition for them. But they both look like shortstops to me, both those guys. Like, you know, they're just so comfortable there that I don't see any reason to move either one of them off the shortstop positions. I would think that that would be in their future. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, Leo obviously looked really good at the major league level at short without Bo there. So one other guy I did want to talk about who, you mentioned the moving around positions quite a bit, and Damiano Palmegiani, he ended up tied for the team lead in home runs, and he, of course, I believe he played first, he played third, he played a little bit of left. What did you kind of see from him this year? I think him coming up as like maybe a helium prospect at the end of last season, and then maybe didn't quite have the season that I'm sure he expected, or that maybe some of the Blue Jays people expected, but overall, like I mean, I think he was kind of like one of the key Bisons this year as far as like a guy who was in there every day.
Yeah, definitely. Like him and Will Robertson, Rafael Antigua, those are kind of the guys that like anchored the team throughout the year because they were the guys that were there all the time. And I mean, he's 24. I think he's going to be 25 when the season starts next year. So he's still, pretty young as far as AAA goes. And great power. Like his power, the power is there. I think he only hit around 210. So definitely want to get the average up, get the contact up. But the power is there. He looks really comfortable at first and third. When they first moved him out to left field this year, he did not look comfortable
Yeah,
like at all. But he got comfortable out there really quickly,
nice.
but yeah, by the end of the season he looked comfortable out there. But at first he first few games he looked a little uh ragging on some fly balls, but quickly adapted. And I'm sure, like I said, and you said, because they value that defensive profile of guys who can play all over the place, I'm sure that he'll be working on the outfield in spring training as well. So definitely, could see some left field in his future as well.
Yeah, always good to kind of have the extra tool in the bag.
Yep.
For him being an older guy and Will Robertson, of course, the guy who tied with him for the lead team lead in home runs, and for them both being older prospects. I mean, Robertson probably kind of like this similar profile to Palmajani. I think you said need like a great power, probably just needs to improve the hit tool a little bit. I mean, is there really like anything else for Will Robertson other than finding a way to strike out a little bit less, basically.
Yeah, and I agree. They're very similar players. Like Robertson's kind of like the left-handed version of Palmigani,
Yeah,
but for Robertson, it was his first season in AAA, and he looked comfortable. Like he homered in his first game. I think it was the second game of the year. It was his first game. He hit a home run, and he just kind of kept that up throughout the season. And I think just kind of getting consistency from him. Like he got off to a hot start and then kind of cooled off a little bit. So, only hit like ended up at 226 with 19 home runs. But I think for him and Parmigiani both, it's finding that consistency. But I think they're both really interesting guys to watch next year, now that they both have a full season of AAA under their belt, like where they take that to next year.
yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that they probably fit right into the group of talent that's kind of pooling right there at right under the major league level. And I mean, I know the Blue Jays farm system as a whole kind of gets um a little bit of hate and kind of gets profiled as like one of the bottom ones in the league. But I think the one thing that they do is they develop like these guys that are probably would be able to be major league depth on a handful of organizations. And of course, I think those guys kind of fit into that bucket as well, if you will.
Yeah, I agree, and I think you saw that this year and 2023 as well with guys
Yeah.
like David Schneider and Ernie Clement. I know didn't come all the way up through the Blue Jays system, but guys like that going up to the major leagues, and then this year with Horwitz and guys like that and Leo Jimenez, they might not have the big flashy names that get them on the top 100 MLB pipeline prospects or something, but they come up through and they're solid major league players when they get to the major leagues.
Yeah, yeah. What one guy who was kind of a major league top 100 guy who spent, the majority of the year in Buffalo, of course, the suspension for Relvis Martinez kind of hurts his progress overall, but he had a really nice year with the Bisons when he was on the field. What did you kind of see from him and how did you kind of think process his comeback and being able to get back onto the field to end the year where he kind of like seemed like he didn't miss a beat when he came back.
Yeah, no, he didn't. And his start was just great. I mean,
Yeah.
and when he came back, he was the same player he's always been. Like that, the power is just there, just easy power. Um, One home run he hit early in the season in Columbus at Huntington Park in Columbus was maybe the farthest home run ever hit in that park.
Oh
I think
wow.
at 469 feet. I
Wow.
actually went there. I think it was the next day or a couple days later. I made the drive to Columbus, and I couldn't believe where the ball landed. Like it like went out of the field, and then they have like this big, maybe like 20 or 30 foot like walkway that it went over. And then there's a building there that has like a restaurant on the second floor. And it landed in the restaurant
Oh
on the
my
second
God,
floor.
wow.
So it went across like the walkway. And like when I saw it, I'm like, I had to ask him, like, is that really where he hit it? Because I thought I must be like mixed
Yeah,
up. But and it was amazing that he hit it that
wow.
far. And I asked him, is that the longest home run you've ever hit? And he answered, something to the effect of, yeah, so far. So yes, it was pretty amazing. But yeah, of course the suspension happened and when he came back he looked like the same player that he had been. Like it didn't look like he'd lost anything. And I know he's playing winter ball right now too, I think for Licey down in
Yeah,
the Dominican. So yeah, so hopefully he'll get a lot of playing time down there to make up for what he's missed during the season because of the suspension. And I think he probably would have been pushing for a major league job next year because he missed so much time this year. Maybe will start in Buffalo
yeah,
and hopefully push his way up to the Blue Jays at some point next year. I think would be ideal for him. But
yeah.
and 'cause he's still a young guy too, so hopefully he can learn from his mistake and make a big contribution next year.
For sure. All in the process of learning how to be a major leaguer for sure.
Yeah.
I kind of want to give you a little bit of freedom to discuss, maybe some of the guys that we haven't. I mean, of course, so many players. You mentioned so many guys that came through the Bisons this year. But who do you think is kind of like an underrated story or a guy that you really enjoyed watching this year that you think was really important to the story of the 2024 Bisons?
Yeah, one guy that comes to mind as you say that is Rafael Antigua. Um, he had a really like a great year in 2023, and then this year kind of got off to a slow start. But recovered and ended up hitting 265, so he's just so consistent. And he reminds me a lot of like Santiago Espinal. And that wherever you stick him in the infield, you can put him at short, you can put him at third, second. He just looks so comfortable. And he plays a lot of left field too, so he's got that defensive versatility. But he's just a guy he's just a super nice guy. Like he oftentimes will serve as my interpreter when I interview a Spanish
Nice.
player because he's very fluent in English and Spanish. So yeah, he's just a nice guy and has really, despite the slow start this year, has just been really consistent for the Bisons the last couple of years. And I think he's kind of like an under radar guy that doesn't get talked about very much.
Yeah,
And
I
then
think. Sorry, go
from
ahead.
the pitching side, if you want a guy, I would say Brandon Isert,
Yeah.
who's now the modern Bison's modern era, which dates back to 1985 when they returned to AAA. He is now their leader in games pitched,
Oh wow.
um, because he's been used so much over the last 3 years. And when you look at his earned run average, I think it ended up in the high threes, but his first outing of the year was like horrendous. It was 2/3 of an inning, and he gave up 7 earned runs.
Oh,
Yeah, and so again, that was probably a time where they left him in to get his pitches in. And so his ERA was inflated really the whole season,
yeah.
but he eventually got it down. But if you took out that one outing, which was his first outing of the year, I think his ERA falls below 3. So he's just a really consistent guy and has been for a number of years. And I know he got a little chance to go up to Toronto and pitch this year, but hopefully he gets more of a shot in the future because he's just that consistent lefty out of the pen that every team needs, and hopefully he can, carry that up to the major league soon.
Yeah, yeah, really cool. I mean, sorry, excuse me. I actually did get to see him pitch in Toronto this year. So yeah,
Yeah,
really,
yeah.
really, really cool to see like guys who've been in the minor leagues for that long kind of get their shot.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, we've been asking kind of the throughout our series as we've been trying to recap the year that was for the minor leagues. We've been asking our guests who, if they had to plant their flag on, one or two guys on the team that they're around, who would kind of be the most impact major leaguer, who that player would be for them.
I think I would say a couple guys that we already talked about. I would probably, and they're kind of the easy guys to take, but I would say Alan Roden and Josh Kasevich.
Yeah,
They were just so impressive at the end of the year, and for both of them, have it be their first time in AAA and play like they did and kind of carry themselves the way they did. that those would be the guys. The other guy who jumps to mind when you say that, who I think just has so much potential, and he wasn't in Buffalo long, but Jonathan Clase.
Yeah.
He is just so athletic and so exciting to watch. And there was a stretch of like maybe like 4 or 5 games where he had maybe like 4 or 5 diving catches in center field, and it was like, oh, this guy's exciting.
Yeah.
And one thing about him too is like he's a natural left-handed hitter,
Right.
and when he was a kid, he started switch hitting, but he stopped switch hitting before he was drafted. And he didn't start switch hitting again until just a couple years ago. I think it was
Oh, really?
2021. Yeah, when
Wow.
he was injured a lot when he was in the Arizona Complex League.
Okay.
And so he's like, well, I'll try switch my hand at switch hitting again. And the weird thing is like, so since he started doing that, he's been a better left hand, his natural side left hand hitter. But this year, if you look at his splits, he actually had a higher average right-handed.
Oh, wow.
He had more power left-handed, but higher average right-handed. So I just think that there's a lot of, he's still very young. He's only 22 years old. There's still a lot of potential there, especially, if he keeps growing as a right-handed hitter, that could really, I think he's really one to watch.
Yeah, yeah, that's super interesting. I think I didn't know that about the switch hitting. So really,
Yeah.
really cool story there, especially if he can, get more reps there. It'll be a nice little tool for him to have.
Yep, absolutely.
One of the I did have it on my list here to ask you about, the trade deadline obviously brings in a few guys there, and Class A is one of those guys. Will Wagner's another, and we saw him in Buffalo for like maybe a week or two,
Yeah.
kind of before he got called up. But the other one is Jake Bloss, and he's I think a pretty interesting case of, where the Astros had so many pitching injuries that maybe he got rushed kind of through AAA into the majors with that organization. And so seeing him get to pitch in AAA was pretty um I think important for that trade, and getting him a little bit of experience before maybe being if instead of the Blue Jays rushing him to the majors just because he was in the majors with the Astros. And obviously the results there were with Buffalo weren't quite what you might have expected for a guy who is like a fringe top 100 guy, and maybe the headliner of the Yusei Kikuchi trade. But what did you see from him in his short time with the Bisons, and what do you think he can kind of be going forward?
Yeah, he came up through the Astros system really extremely quickly. It's hard to believe like he's only been in pro baseball for a couple of years. And I think he had 8 outings for Buffalo, and I would say 4 of them were really solid. A couple of them were good, and then a couple of them were a little rough, which kind of inflated his ERA. But he went to Lafayette College. The first thing that strikes you about him when you talk to him is like he's a really intelligent guy. Like
Okay.
he went to Lafayette College as a finance and math
Oh,
major,
interesting.
and then from there went to Georgetown for his master's degree, which is obviously a great school, and got his master's degree in economics. And then it was during his 1 year at Georgetown that he really kind of took off pitching wise. Like he added weight, started throwing harder. He says that his curveball and breaking pitches became more consistent during that time. And that's kind of when he put his name on the map for the draft, was there at Georgetown. So he's only been, really uh like 3 years kind of been at this level of pitching, and only been a pro for a couple of years. So he completely skipped AAA with the Astros. He got called up to the majors from AA, and had only made one AAA start before he came to the Bisons. And I think that might have been like a rehab start even.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah, and so I think there's a lot of growth that could happen there as well. Like he's only 23, very composed on the mound, like doesn't show a lot of emotion. Watching his body language, you wouldn't know if he's having a great game or having a not so great game. So yeah, he looks like a lot of potential. And
Yeah.
I think because he hasn't pitched in AAA that much, I wouldn't be surprised if he starts in Buffalo next year as a starting pitcher, and then hopefully, again, kind of pushes the Blue Jays' hand, and it can make it up to the majors. But I wouldn't be surprised if, especially since they didn't call him up at the end of this year, that if they want him to start in Buffalo and get a little bit more AAA experience before they call him up.
Yeah, yeah, it'll be interesting to see. He's I think a really interesting pitcher, and we'll kind of see what where the results fall next year, and kind of what the Blue Jays do this offseason as far as maybe adding another starting pitcher, or kind of what how that all goes in terms of their 2025 five roster.
Yeah, there
Uh
definitely could be a lot of roster movement up there, so that's going to have a lot of effect on the Bisons. Absolutely.
Yeah, you're gonna have another year with six 60 or so guys. Maybe we'll see. We'll
Yeah.
see. One thing I did want to ask you about before you go. I mean, a year um with so many different stories, but the Joey Votto story is interesting, and I mean, he got his time there before he does ultimately announce his retirement as a Buffalo Bison. What was it like getting to cover him and getting to watch some of his games, even if they weren't the most productive from an on-field standpoint?
It was amazing, when you have a guy coming in like that you know is probably going to be a Hall of Famer, and have him come in and knowing that he's going to be in Buffalo for a while, not just for like one game rehab or something and be gone. It was amazing to have him here. I think the thing with him was he just couldn't get the timing down at the plate. Like, I think it was his first start. He pinch hit a couple times. Then his first start with the Bisons was in Worcester, and he took a swing and it reminded me of like a wiffle ball swing or something. It was just kind of like an easy little swing and just lined this rocket into the right field seats for a home run. And I was like, wow, this is gonna
Yeah.
be something. But that was kind of like after that, he just couldn't get his timing down. I think he struck out in about half of his at bats and just didn't look good, a lot of the time on a lot of his swings. And I think he felt that and just kind of knew that it would that from me, I watching him, I thought, oh, it's just a matter of time. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah.
But I think with the season, I think if it would have been like April or May, he would have given it longer to see
Yeah.
if the timing came back. But I think with the season winding down and everything, that he just decided that was, it wasn't going to happen this year. So he might as well call it a career.
Yeah.
But it was phenomenal having him here while he was here.
Yeah, it's too bad that it didn't work out, but I think just really cool to see him play in the minor leagues this year and kind of get his chance there and to be a member of the Blue Jays organization. So that was all super cool.
Absolutely.
One last one for you before I let you go here. We talk about Joey Votto, a future Hall of Famer. Leading into the year, you got to speak with a pair of former Bisons and a pair of Hall of Famers in Fergie Jenkins and Johnny Bench. If you haven't read these stories to the listeners, I would suggest you go check them out at herdchronicles.com. Really cool stories from Brian, really cool conversations. What was it like for you getting to speak with, Fergie Jenkins and Johnny Bench?
It was absolutely amazing, and I talked with them in probably like a 3 week span, and
Okay.
and so and I was like, wow, yeah, and both of them, eh, I think I think my interview with them was like something that they're not accustomed to. Like, obviously they're both always answering questions about their career, but I was kind of I asked them about their major league career, but I was really kind of focusing on their minor league days and their time with the Bisons and
Yeah.
stuff. I think it brought a lot of enthusiasm from them because they were talking about something that they don't normally talk about and kind of reminiscing about their days in the minor leagues. And so it really was fun, like Johnny Bench was talking about like where he actually like lived when he was here, which I know the building well,
Oh
and
wow.
like
Yeah.
the pizza joint that he used to eat at across the street, which isn't there anymore, but it was just kind of cool like hearing them talk so specifically about their time here. And yeah, just absolutely dream come true talking with both of them and getting to hear about their days here in Buffalo and in the minor leagues.
Yeah, I bet. I bet. So cool and really enjoyed reading those. So well, I'm gonna let you run because I took a little bit more of your time than I said I was going to. But thank you so much for all the work you do covering the Bisons. It's really great to keep up and really a great way to follow the team. So really appreciate all the work you do and really appreciate you taking the time to do this today.
Absolutely. And like I said, I'm a big fan of your podcast, so I love coming on and you keep up the good work as well.
Thank you very much. That is Brian Frank. You can follow him on Twitter at Herd Chronicles. And of course, you can follow all of his work covering the Bisons at herdchronicles.com. That is going to do it for us here today at the Bird's Eye View podcast. Make sure to hit the subscribe and like buttons if you're watching on YouTube. You can find us there at the Bird's Eye View pod. If you're listening along on the podcast provider of your choice, make sure to drop a follow and review. If you want to shoot us an email, you can find us there at birdseyeviewpod@gmail.com. You can follow us all on Twitter. I'm at Worden_Zach. The pod is at BEV_pod. Thank you so much for listening.